That worked. All right. Are we live? All right. Let's reconvene. When we left off before the break, Councilman Jensen was going to ask a question or make an observation. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. So I wanted to make a comment on the street maintenance update. I think it's an excellent plan. I'm very pleased to see that we're doing something to try and keep the existing streets we have clean and maintained. $1 million does not pave a whole lot in terms of impact overall to the entire city, and this does. So I'm supportive of reallocating a small portion of money to stop the bleeding, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? If I could draw perhaps city manager or one of you two staff. At the bottom, it talks, there is text about, maybe you could respond to that text.
Sure. So on the bottom there's a section that's called Future Decisions. And what this acknowledges, we've been talking about this a lot, this came up at the first meeting, is whether or not and how to use general funds or other funds. What's the future of our street maintenance program? And this acknowledges that those conversations are important and will need to be had. For sure, as this explains, the half-cent sales tax, as we've talked about for now, will be up in 2019, either for another vote. That might look different. We don't know at this point. Also, the motor fuel fund, every year we're spending more than we're making in that fund. So the balance is declining. At this point, both funds have adequate resources that can easily cover the street maintenance plan that's been presented. So we do believe that at this point in the 16 budget that these are the best solutions. But that in future years, maybe even next year, we need to start talking about general fund or even other sources and what the appropriate share for street maintenance would be between all of our funding sources.
Thank you. And just to clarify also, when this was proposed, perhaps for Doug Whitaker or city manager, there was the discussion that if this new team was doing all of these new things, or doing all of the street sweeping and everything related to that, that it would relieve enough of pressure on other staff time that things like striping, crack sealing, other preventive maintenance activities would be able to be at full bore as well?
Deputy Mayor, yes. That it would allow us to maintain those teams out there and doing work. I mean, to be very straightforward with what's going on right now, there's been an emphasis to have to go out and do street sweeping. We're out street sweeping and we've had to pull off of other work, and that's put us behind in other areas. This would allow us to keep both processes going.
And these crews would also be involved in snow removal, likely?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor?
But not in June.
Right. Correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hopefully.
Councilwoman Clear. Never say never.
I'm kind of torn on this issue. I'm not sure I have the proof that this is going to benefit. You know, where's the numbers? What's the proof that this is going to benefit and be impactful, a wise use of our money? The sweeping. I mean, how can you prove that's going to, and how can you prove that it hasn't?
As far as proving, basically I think what this is looking at, we're saying having a dedicated street sweeping crew, which would then maintain that we would be out there sweeping, because as we've listened to our citizens and the complaints that are coming in, it seems to be, it is related to, we're not sweeping their streets, we're not fixing the alleys, and we're, you know, and doing, and you know, regular street maintenance out there. And as we said right now, and that's what's going on right now. I know there's some issues, is why haven't we gotten to certain alleys right now? Well, we've had to go out and we're street sweeping right now, so we don't have the personnel to be able to go do the alley. So then that just slides a little bit further. The weather obviously compounds that also. So it's just basically giving us the staff that allows us to do all of these processes you know, at the same time, versus working on one, pulling off of it and going to another.
So it's not necessarily for maintenance, it's because people have asked for this.
City
If
Manager.
I could actually just ask Mr. Gerber to weigh in on this also. So, as Doug mentioned last week, there are some issues pertaining to the streets and the wear, that's not the right word, the impact of the water and the stuff that sits in the street. But I think also more importantly, there's a significant amount of stuff that goes into our stormwater system and causes maintenance issues there also. So Doug, if maybe you could chat about that.
Mr. Manager, Deputy Mayor, Council. Indeed, as we talked about, I think in the last Budget Committee meeting, what happens on the surface level also impacts our water quality, our wastewater, and our stormwater, all three of those things. So it's a comprehensive approach. As part of our NPDS permit, that's our stormwater quality permit, we're required to meet certain standards, and in fact, we're required to have, part of getting that permit is that we have to have a street sweeping plan associated with that. And so, I mean, I can get you very specific details if you'd like, but in general, we have to have a street sweeping plan associated with that. And again, generally, the more we can keep, that we can pick up and keep from going into our stormwater inlets and having to treat then subsequently at the plant, the better off we are.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Shum.
I think part of the concern, and like Councilwoman Clear, it's a hard issue for me because I'm seeing almost $700,000, and the question is, do we spend it on maintenance as is currently allotted, or could that improve some of the infrastructure? Could that fix infrastructure that we've already promised our citizens years ago would be fixed? And that's the hard trade-off. So if I could, City Manager, just get some clarification. I know you've done some budget maneuvering to make this work. I guess the simple question I would have is the money, the $693,000, would that actually be available for infrastructure with the regulations that are on us, or would it not be available and you've made the best choice you can because it would be allowed to be maintenance but not new streets?
Deputy Mayor, Council Member. So I want to limit my conversation only to the half-cent sales tax. I don't know the ins and outs of the motor fuel tax limitations, but somebody sitting nearby me does. This is not a matter of one or the other. We're talking about $8 million of investment in new streets. In addition to that, we're talking about an increment of funds that would be available to do the street maintenance and the street sweeping. Street sweeping being part of the street maintenance program. So yes, as far as the half-cent sales tax is concerned, and as was articulated by the Deputy Mayor, those funds could be used for the construction of the replacement of or new construction of, or I'm sorry, replacement of the existing infrastructure of the streets that would be there.
Is that?
Well, and I appreciate, I'm not against maintaining the streets. I'm just questioning whether it would be wiser to start maintaining them next year, as bad as that sounds, and fix more streets this year that can then be maintained next year. And that's the issue that comes down for me as I think about it.
If I can, we're maxing out our capacity to build new streets. So I'll look at Doug. I don't think we could build more streets this year. I think the goal was to spend as much money as we could on residential streets and the other scheduled half-cent sales tax projects this year, at the same time to strengthen the repair and maintenance program.
Well, thank you. That's very good to know.
Just to clarify, when you said build new streets, what you meant was rebuild existing streets.
I backed myself
right?
up verbally
okay.
there.
Just checking. Councilman Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question goes to Doug. 2 years ago, you came out to Shadywood South, I think it was. We have Shadywood West, Shadywood East, Shadywood South, and talked about a curb and maintenance plan that you wanted, you were new on the job and wanted to put in, some kind of program that would do curb and maintenance, which is, like I said, I think in our district, we would much rather to have the repairs done to the streets rather than the street cleaning. Do you have that now built, the curb and maintenance plan in the city? I mean, I know if we're looking at street cleaning and, you know, how often we're gonna clean the streets every 2 months, when can Shadywood South expect, I know that the answer is like 2018, that we will get those streets fixed according to the half-cent sales tax, whatever. But do we have a curb and maintenance plan that would, you know, people that have issues with the curbs or the maintenance? I know we did Clarion Woods, part of it last year, had to replace some curbs and the guttering. So you know, as I said, I would almost have rather this go towards doing that type of work rather than street cleaning. Do we have a curb and guttering plan now?
Yes, in the CIP, we have the $500,000 per year that is put towards curb and gutter replacements, and that is in what we would call maintenance type repairs, in that we're not going in and just doing an entire, you know, subdivision or street. Normally we would do that when we redid a street, but like what we did in Clarion Woods, yes, we go in and we have that money and it's used for curb and gutter replacements and repairs as needed, and we take it on an as-is basis. I mean, the first come, first serve. In the case of the subdivision that's Shadywood, they are on our list. We have curb and gutter projects identified out through 2018 based on spending $500,000 per year, which we have allotted, like I said, in the CIP. I've talked with my street department, could we do more? Because as we came up with a question here, we feel you start getting out more than that, we're starting to limit again on what we can do with our contractors out there, because the contractors we're using for curb and gutter are also, in a lot of cases, our street contractors. So there's only so much, you know, work that we can get out there, you know, and stay ahead of it. And we don't need, like we kind of had when I came in 13, where there's this project sitting and nothing going on and work there. It's trying to keep it moving forward. So I mean, there is an identified project or budget for that.
And that leads to another question, if I may. Do we have anything in our contracts? I know with the state, with the highway contracts to fix the highways and stuff, if they have a cutoff date, and if the crew is not done by that cutoff date, there's actually a penalty in how much the contractor receives. Do we have that built into our contracts?
Yes. In fact, we actually, in the last couple of years, as we've looked at it, we have changed from basically a number of days to complete a project, and have now are working more with a date specific, okay, meaning it needs to be done by such and such a date.
Great, thank you.
Other questions on this at this point? We're going to get up to motor fuels tax here shortly, so that will give us maybe another side of this proposal and equation. More now? Okay, let's.
Okay, thank you. The countywide half-cent sales tax is on page 134. I'll just take a minute here because I think we've actually already discussed this. On the expenditure side, this budget is similar to how we've been budgeted since the beginning of the countywide, and that is the revenues coming in equal the expenditures going out. It gets transferred up to JADO, and then they cover the projects that were approved as part of the countywide half-cent sales tax. So that's what you see on the expense side. The reason on the revenue side that it goes up by that for the $8.2 million, that's tying back to the estimated amount at this point that may be coming back in the excess from the current countywide half-cent sales tax. As we've talked about, we didn't show anything on the expense side for that because it's going to actually be received in 2017. First, we've got to make sure everything's been paid out as it needs to be. That's actually received in 17 and then accrued back to 16. So technically, it won't be anything we can spend. It's something we'll be talking about over the next year, and you'd be seeing in the next budget how that's actually spent out.
Questions on that? Oh, sorry.
And that is the city share, correct? It's
Yes.
half city, half county. They get, it's 8.2 for city, 8.2 for county.
Well, no, it's not.
I don't know what the exact
50-50.
split is, but this is the city.
Okay, yeah, it's not 50-50,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there is a split, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, the transient guest tax fund is on page 122. The reason I bring this one up is I just wanted to update everybody on where we are with the committee at this point. There's a pretty big decision being made on a portion of the transient guest tax funds. This is the fund that, of course, is the hotel tax, a lot of people call it, and the transient guest tax committee actually sets what the uses of, they recommend the uses of the funds, they recommend it to the larger governing body, and usually that's done before the time that the budget's approved, so that when you all have this conversation, what you're looking at reflects what the committee approved. This year, the committee did do that. They went through the steps. They approved the 2016 budget. The piece that's still to be decided is how to spend the extension of the 1%. There's been 1% of the tax dedicated towards historic properties, Riverfront Park, the station, and then our Historic Preservation Fund. That 1%, actually we have through the first of the year to decide or to figure out what that's going to be spent on. So rather than rushing it to get it done in time for the budget, we put a placeholder in here, that's that $383,000, so that you all can allocate that expenditure authority. But the Transient Guest Tax Committee is going to be meeting in July and August to hear from constituents, hear from the public, and put together a plan for that. And then the larger council would receive that as a charter ordinance, because it's the charter ordinance that lines out how that 1% is to be spent. So you all will be hearing, you have to hear details on how that's going to be spent. But at this time, we have the placeholder in the budget for that authority.
Questions? Thank you.
Okay. Motor fuel, this is actually page 89. It's in the Public Works section of your budget book. I really have nothing else to add to this other than what we've already discussed, so wanted to put this on here to acknowledge the fact that the memo does discuss some changes that would need to happen to some specific line items within the fund. But otherwise, unless you have questions, there's really nothing else I need to add in addition to what was in the memo.
I would think the only thing to address a little further was the discussion with the proposal for street maintenance, that there was room in that in the motor fuels fund to accommodate spending a little more out of it. So what we're seeing is that fund's ending balance dropping substantially in 2016. So at the same expenditure levels, it'd be gone by the end of 2017. Is that correct?
If you project it out at the same pace as it's going now.
Mm-hmm. Just something for us to keep in mind. Councilman Clear?
Can you tell me where it says on the 54502, the rock and sand, how it went from 2,000 to 40,000? I mean, what's that used for? And then the de-icer, it's like 275,000 to 75,000.
The de-icer, we also sometimes stock up.
Mm.
You know, so that would be some of it there. Rock and sand, I can ask Ron to come up and answer that. He's probably got more details on that if you would like.
Yeah, like, why is there such a big difference?
This is Ron Raines from Street.
Thank you. City Manager, Deputy Mayor, Council, Ron Raines, Street Maintenance. The additional rock that you're seeing forecasted has to do with the number of full-depth repairs that we're undertaking in-house now that we weren't doing in the past. Anytime you remove pavement that has failed, there's subgrade issues. That additional rock is used to refill, recompact, and repair the subgrade before we put the pavement back in.
So did you just stop doing that for 1 year or something? Or did they just all happen at one time?
We have increased the number of projects we're trying to do in-house each and every year, and that is why for that increase is there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Might be switching the proverbial gears to risks funds. We're ready.
Okay, guess we've been pretty infrastructure heavy, so let's talk about something new. Risk funds starts on page 178 in your binder.
It's got a full tab.
Wanted to highlight a few of these.
Nikki, hold on a second.
Oh, sure.
So, hey, Ron, before you stop paying attention, I just want to be clear, I think we might have answered the de-icer question in the opposite direction of what it was intended. We actually dropped the budget by $200,000 in de-icing this year, and my guess is that's because we didn't use it last year because we didn't have a lot of winter experiences. So was that what you were asking? Why is it so low?
Why the difference?
Okay. Is that still, is that the right answer, Ron?
Yes, sir. It'll vary from year to year depending on how much we use.
So
And
like-
we stockpile it.
So we stockpile it, it depends on how the winter goes
Yeah.
and how we use it.
You currently have about 8,000 tons of de-icing material in buildings right now.
Okay, we are ready.
I just wanted to make sure that we answered it right.
Thank you. No.
Thank you.
All right, Doug, you're welcome to stay out front for the risk funds, but I think we're done.
Thank you.
Took them longer than I thought.
Okay, the risk funds, a few that we wanted to highlight here are workers' comp and then our health insurance fund. Workers' comp is page 180. This is the fund that we use to pay out for workers' comp claims, and the way that this is funded, along with most other cities, is that we charge our own departments based on a certain rate. They all pay into this fund, and then this fund is what pays out any claims for any kind of workers' comp claims, which you all are familiar with whenever you hear them at council meetings. The rates that are charged to departments are varied based on the position, and they're based on the amount of risk. So for a clerical worker like myself, I have a very low rate because I have a very low risk job, but for streets workers, for utility workers, for police and fire, they're all charged at a proportionally higher rate. So that's how this fund is funded. And there was a good question in the Q&A, which we've already answered and can go into a little bit here. I just wanted to address the change in the balance in this fund. We haven't really talked a whole lot about how we show on the top of each of these fund sheets the balances, but as you can see, by the end of 15, we're projecting that we're going to go from a negative balance to a positive 841,000 balance. And I really wanted to explain the reason there to make sure that everybody understood that. This is also in the Q&A. Really, it's best practice for all of our funds not to carry any kind of a negative cash or fund balance. So in this fund, in order to bring this balance to a positive balance, we actually made a transfer in 2014 from the Risk Reserve Fund to the Workers' Comp Fund. The point of the Risk Reserve Fund is for these purposes. It's a backup. It's there to support any of our risk funds if and when they're needed. It was used for the health fund a couple of years ago. So the decision was made to transfer that into the Workers' Comp Fund to get that to a positive balance. And then as you see in future years, in the 15 and the 16 budget, in this fund, we actually make more revenues than we anticipate to expend, and that is in order to prepare ourselves for the balance for those terrible situations, the cases where sometimes you're paying out families for years and years ahead of time. Those are all counted as liabilities that we need to account for and be prepared for. So we really need to get this not only to a positive balance, but even be building it for a couple of years. Once we get it to a healthy place, then we can talk about where we need to be with this fund, but this is really bringing it to a more appropriate amount.
Questions? Nikki, maybe you were going to get to it, but the risk management reserve, which is on page 185 then, as of 2014, is pretty well drained. Are there, based on what you said, that it's the reserve for a variety of other funds, which we have been doing a great job at building up, what's the plan for the risk management reserve?
So what we said in the Q&A, and I would say it again, is that that's really the next step, is that we need to decide how to replenish the risk reserve. Okay. All of the risk funds other than workers' comp are now in a very healthy place with their balances. We wouldn't have made this transfer or transferred it down to zero if any of them were at risk. So we're in a place where we felt comfortable doing that, but that's exactly right, is that that is something that we would need to build up and have a plan for that.
But you felt we were fine not addressing that in 2016?
Yes.
Thank you. Other, proceed.
Okay, the health insurance fund. Oops. Page 182 in your books. This is the city's health insurance plan that covers any of our employees or retirees that qualify that are under our health plan are covered in this fund. And wanted to go through briefly, we talked about it a little bit the first meeting because this fund impacts all of the other funds, a little bit of the history of this one. The health fund, and for the city of Topeka and every other city and every other corporation, I'm guessing everywhere, this is an area that's needed a lot of focus. There's been a lot of changes, and basically a lot of careful work to be done to make sure that everybody is preparing on the health side for all of the new requirements and all of the new plans and needs for people out there. So on our health fund, pretty much in 2011, the plan got to a negative balance. It was a result of a terrible year on the claims side, so it's just one of those perfect storms of a lot of really bad claims hitting against the fund. In addition, we didn't have some internals controls in place to have a maximum on the risk of that all of those could hit the fund, and we weren't charging employees appropriately. So it's kind of tradition with government employers that you have really good rates for people to be on your health plans, and Topeka was really doing that, which is great. It's a great recruitment tool, good for the employees, but unfortunately, if you're not charging employees based on their cost to your plan, so everyone is underpaying for the cost, and you have a terrible year where a lot of claims happen, that's where you run the risk of it all getting drained down, which is exactly what happened. So what's happened these past few years is we've had to swing the other direction. So basically, the employees have had to contribute more into the plan. Right now, they're really a lot more in line with private sector when we compare against other public sector employers. We're not out of line with what really the market is having different employees pay for coverage, but it is maybe more than definitely what was in the city in the past and definitely than some other government employees. But because of that, we've built the fund up to where it needs to be today. So now we have an opportunity, we started talking about last year with the budget, to create a healthier employee base and to make some changes with the fund to reduce our claims, all with the goal of reducing costs to employees and employers. We share in the cost of a plan, so if it's cheaper for you to be on our insurance, it's also cheaper for us to cover you, so that's a win-win. Something that was introduced with the 15 budget that we're carrying forward with 16 is the introduction of a health clinic. So starting in September, opening in September of 15th, we're going to have a clinic located at this point in the Holiday Building for employees that are covered on the city's plan. And the purpose of this clinic is it would be a choice for employees to use for the kinds of clinic care. We like to compare it to acute care type needs. So what you'd go to Walgreens for, the basic needs, you go to your primary care physician. It'd be staffed by a nurse practitioner, and it's cheaper for the employee for not having to pay a copay, and it's cheaper for the employer and for the health plan because it costs us a lot less to pay towards that than it does for a visit for a traditional doctor's office. So this will be introduced with the 15 budget. The costs for that are reflected in the plan, in the budget in front of you. So it's accounted for in individual and contractual services. We will pay for a company to run this program for us. And then also under capital projects, there is some capital work that needs to be done to get this clinic to where it needs to be. All of these costs, we will get a return, actually guaranteed return on savings in the long run, but it does take an upfront cost. So that's kind of an overview of, again, just wanted to touch base. This is actually something that was done with the 15 budget that we're carrying forward and wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that.
Questions? Nikki? Oh,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Serving on the Wellness Committee has been a very good education. As a city council person, I've really appreciated how the committee has taken a different direction. I think a couple years ago when we knew our insurance rates were going up $200 a year for city employees. There was some discussion to ask the city for that $200 and get those premiums paid. And we have since decided that the best way to address that is through this clinic, I think we've had a lot of health assessments done, and we have shown that we are going to move forward with this, and we will save on our health insurance plans, the claims and all of that. So my question, and I'm very proud to be a part of that, and Jackie has done, and her staff have done a great job with talking about even working with Willis, the contractual company that we have with that, to show us where these numbers and how we're doing compared to other cities. But so the clinic, is that in that 507,000 line under the individual and contractual services? So that 507,000, is that what we are estimating the clinic is going to cost? I see Jackie shaking her head.
Let me walk through that a little bit on that page 183. Actually, you see 376,000 on that 52200 contractual services.
Okay.
That's actually the administrative fee to pay towards health stat is going to be running the program. There's a couple of other line items below that add up to that 507,000. So that 507,000 includes more than just the health clinic we're talking about.
Okay.
And actually, this is a good point that you make, that 128,000 under admin fees. We hadn't been charging an admin fee. This is related to the admin fee that we talked about with utilities to the health fund for several years because it couldn't afford it. But this is an actual reflection of how much this uses as part of the general fund, so we are reintroducing that. And then that very last line on the page, that capital line, we don't believe at this point that we're going to need that full budget authority for both years, but left it in there because it's a fluid plan. Actually, we know more today than we did 2 weeks ago about this. But what that is that would be to the cost to retrofit any space that we would choose for the actual clinic.
you called
So
that a
those are the two
capital line,
costs.
but that's the one that says op trans.
Sorry, that would be a
250,000
transfer
here.
into a capital project. Thank you.
And I hope that, if I may follow up, we visited Olathe to see the return on the dollar is so amazing when you get these clinics and their programs. They've even extended them to spouses and family. And I hope that we do move forward in that direction, and that we have employees who are very supportive of a wellness, your risk management and that type of thing. So, very good job done.
Yeah, good work, everyone. Nikki, just briefly then, with that 250,000 and whatever else is there, what would you expect with what you said about startup dollars that line item or that column would look like for expenses next year?
Oh gosh, I don't know if we can either follow up or they may know it off the top of their head. The cost is different per year versus the first year versus the next few years.
Right, I mean, you were saying it would drop back.
We don't have the final design yet for the clinic space, and so I think that it would be probably about 4 to 6 weeks before we would know exactly what to expect in equipment to retrofit the space as it comes up online.
I just didn't know.
Are you talking about the transfer, the 250, or
Well,
the?
just overall, Nikki had said that she thought that it was loaded with some costs that would be startup costs that then would drop off by the next year. And I was simply curious what in general you thought would drop off and what it would look like. Yeah, just around.
Right. We don't expect there to be a transfer after the space is completed.
So just that.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Moving on.
Okay,
Thank you.
internal service fees, put a few of these together We'll be touching really quickly on Fleet Fund, IT Fund, and Facilities Fund. Fleet Fund is page 148.
Nick, you have a question. If somebody had a question about another risk fund, would this be an appropriate time before we move on? Any other risk funds? I had a question about the special liability fund, and I don't know if that's considered a risk fund or not. It's elsewhere in the book.
That's fine.
Okay. It's on page 121. And it's one that is expecting an ending cash balance of 0. So that caught my eye.
Sure. Thank you. Let me clarify here. What we've been doing the past few years with the special liability fund is budgeting it to 0 to give ourselves enough expenditure authority for when and if we would ever need to pay out a large claim. We did the same thing with the 15 budget. We don't anticipate ever having to need to come to that cap. Like, as you can see, most of where that extra budget authority is in a contingency line, or in a pay and claims and damages line. Actually, in 14, we only spent under $50,000 in one of those accounts, so we budget more than we anticipate we're going to need in case that we do.
Okay. Questions? Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Fleet Fund is page 148. This has been addressed in a couple of Q&As, and we've talked about it a little bit, so I don't know that we need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but in general, internal service funds are funds that we set up within the city to charge out our own departments for services. And the reason that you use internal services funds is so that you can accurately track how much you're spending on those specific items and charge the specific departments. If these were simply another department, like the facilities fund used to be just another general fund expenditure, you wouldn't always have other funds always paying into it as they should, and you also, sometimes it gets kind of lost in the mix. When you designate these as their own funds, it's very clear how much they're spending, what their revenue sources are, and all of the individual departments are paying into the appropriate level. So really, that's why we would use internal service funds. The Fleet Fund on page 148, we've talked a little bit about this, but really in all of these funds, there's a theme where when you set that next year's budget, you look at the most recent prior year's expenditures. So what Fleet does is they look at, of the departments that have fleet, who had the most use of it in that the most recent year. They know what their ultimate operating budget needs to be, and then based on whatever percentage up in that prior year those different areas had uses, that's how we figure out how much we allocate out. In the Fleet Fund and the IT Fund, the IT Fund is on page 145. Neither of those have large changes in their expenditures. They both have the same number of positions paid out of that fund, so there's really no large change in the way that they're operating. On the IT Fund, we did, as we've talked about a couple of times, better allocate out to the appropriate departments and funds based on who was using them. So we did kind of retool how that fee structure was set up, but ultimately the revenue that was brought into the fund is the same as the prior year. On the Facilities Fund, page 152, this fund was actually new in 2013, so it's kind of been a little bit different every year as we really try to find out what are our facilities needs and what's the appropriate budget amount. In this fund, we talked a little bit about the 2 FTEs. With facilities, we've had a long exploration of what makes sense to pay, what makes sense to outsource, what makes sense to do ourselves. And with these 2 new facilities positions, we were actually paying for custodial contracts in the utilities that were way more than it would have cost to hire 2 new employees in these areas. So the decision was made to actually add these 2 employees rather than to contract it out. So that's what these 2 employees tie to. And the way the facilities fund is the fee structure is set up is based not only on prior year usage, which is we look at work orders, but also on square footage. So if a certain department or a certain fund takes up a larger area, then that would actually reflect in the way that their facility fund is allocated to them.
Questions?
I just comment, these are very important roles, and I compliment the aspect of improving the operation, the process. And actually the ones these are the things we never hear about in a sense because they're internal, but they're probably some of the most crucial in making a city operate and do its job. And I compliment the efforts in improving the process. I've visited some of these facilities, and it's a lot of people doing very challenging jobs, but they're vital, like keeping the trucks running, little things like that, and old equipment and using baling wire to keep it going sometimes. But they're vital and they're very important to the community. And compliment the administration and all the people that work in these areas.
Thank you. Well said. Other internal funds? Nope. Okay. The next on the list is any other funds needing discussion. So we have not, she has not walked us through them all, but if people had questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have always had some concerns about our city communications and what's going on in Topeka. And I know City 4 has done a very good job of televising city and county meetings, but I've often heard that we haven't had notification of what's going on. And when you turn on City 4, sometimes all you get is just a couple of messages that says something about the trash or whatever. I have often wondered if there's been any discussion to beef up the city county. I mean, it's for both city and county, that we have more on that channel, that really rather than just. And I don't know if that's in IT or where that is in the budget.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Councilmember Schwartz. Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot of conversation. And in fact, we met today. There's some things that we want to do in terms of increased programming, having a show with the mayor, with each of the council members, focus on police activities, fire activities, other things that are of interest in the city, do more educational type of activities. So we had a meeting on it today, and we're going to continue to push that. I know that I think we did the first mayor show as a trial on it, and so we're looking at a program to continue to run different things through, but give each of the council members and some of the department heads that people are interested in their departments, talk about some of their things. So yes, we agree with you.
Okay, and the new gentleman at Visit Topeka, some of the others, we've talked about, well, for example, I was at Wheatstock this weekend volunteering at the food table, and I think that a lot of people that I talked to there, I specifically asked where they were from, and we had people there from Oklahoma City and a couple other cities, but I don't think we had very many people there from Topeka, and I think it was just the fact that we don't get the communication out of what's going on. I know we have 365 and that type of thing, but I've encouraged them to work with the city and maybe, doing something in city communications. So I would like to see that in the future, further discussion on the city communications. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll tag on that very briefly in that the response we got on one of the QAs about the status of City 4, a lot of people have been worried about that, and so the fact that we are basically ready to be fully up with all of our different transmissions will make a difference, put us in a position to do that extra programming so people aren't calling us up screaming that they can't hear it. So that's kudos to everybody involved in that. All right, we have finished I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, I can't wait for the budget hour with Doug Gerber and Nikki Lee.
We'll start the ratings, right? Richard.
Thank you. Question for City Attorney. From a procedural point of view, we're at the end of the budget review at this point. To put us in a procedural position where we could begin entertaining and discussing actual amendments to the budget, would it be appropriate for there to be a motion, a motion for this committee to recommend to the full council adoption of the budget, which would then allow us to entertain amendments? Your
Yes,
thought, please?
That would be appropriate.
Okay.
Move to approve recommendation of the 26 budget as amended by and presented by the staff.
And I believe, Ms. Lee, that we have not adopted any amendments at this point?
No, we've presented some amendments, so the ones, the motor fuel, the half cent, and then there were a few general fund related ideas that were floated in prior meetings. I can go through those if you would like, but to be cleanest, there probably would need to be probably a motion on each of those. So we knew whether that was part of the amended budget you referred to or not.
What I'd like to do before we go into that is to double check with those who wanted more information. The city manager has assured me that if people who want more information would like to have a work session with staff, that he would arrange that. The question would be whether, that would certainly be informative and help you feel better prepared to finish that process. There is some sense that it would be unlikely to change your thoughts on these, to move forward and come up with a recommendation. So I want to open up to you that the offer is out there for a little more background, as much as you want actually, on the budget. But do you feel like you could move forward with some tentative recommendations, or the committee recommendation actually, on this budget now, or do you feel like you need to wait? The ideal, of course, is that what this committee recommends is deliberated as much as people think it needs to be, and that goes forward to the session where we vote on the budget cap, and then goes forward as is and is voted in as is in August, rather than setting it up for a bunch of amendments at that time. So it's important that you're comfortable moving forward at this point. I'm particularly looking at the two who've spoken up, but straw poll, how many are ready to move forward with making the budget recommendations at this point? Hands. Three that are not. Councilwoman?
You didn't count me, did you?
I did.
Well, I
No,
don't
that's
have,
right, you
I
have to
don't have a
vote.
vote.
All right, so two.
don't-
All right.
I'm not-
Thank you for that
I'm
clarification.
abstaining.
Councilwoman?
I guess I need clarification from the 2 previous years that I have been here. I don't remember that we voted to pass the budget and then made discussion for amendments. I thought that what came before the council that we voted on at the council meeting that went on for several hours, both years, was the synopsis of all the discussion. But did we, and I guess that's a question for legal, did we pass a budget here in LEC and then make amendments to it, and then it went to the city council meeting in July?
I'll defer to the city manager.
I know you're asking the city attorney, but two years ago, this committee did not approve a recommended budget to go to council. So when we went to council, we actually picked it up and did the whole thing starting that night, and there was a lot of discussion on it. Last year, this committee voted in favor of a recommended budget that went to council, was accepted by the council, and voted on by the body at that point.
And procedurally, we've done both ways, really. We've either taken point by point and just had people recommend things they wanted to add, voted them up or down, or delete, voted them up or down, and then have voted through the budget based on what the final votes were on each of the items. And I guess my thought is for moving forward today, because the staff has put forth a proposal that is significant, that if we started by voting the street proposal up or down and then accepted Councilman Harmon's suggestion to approve the budget as amended with the staff's amendment, and then went through any individual proposals that people had, might be the most straightforward way to do it. Councilman Harmon?
Well, thank you. The reason I said what I did was because this is our last regularly scheduled budget committee hearing. But I'm also sensing that some council members may have some amendments that they may want, which is fine, and that's appropriate, and that's certainly part of the process. So what I would recommend is that we schedule another budget committee meeting for the purpose of entertaining motions, entertaining amendments to the budget, and at that time, at the conclusion of that, then we'll be in a better position to make a recommendation as a budget committee to the full council.
I appreciate that. It probably would not need to be a 3-hour meeting, but we could, that would be a way to simply stop tonight. For those of you who want a little more, if we can get that scheduled soon, it'll happen before that event. Councilwoman De Lisla and Councilman
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Jensen.
How are we with regards to the agenda for the next meeting in July? Would this be something that would be able to be incorporated as part of the agenda?
Just
To
add
call
it.
for the budget committee to meet as part of that meeting, and then us continue the discussion and allocate at least 1 hour for
That's
that
a thought.
discussion?
That's a thought. City Manager?
So I could make a suggestion, and
Okay.
I know that next week is rolling into a fairly significant holiday for a lot of families, 4th of July. But next Tuesday is I hate talking about a 5th Tuesday, but, and a lot of people well in advance plan those away. If people are interested, what I was thinking is we could do an optional meeting next Thursday to provide departmental information for those who want to hear it. And then maybe either later in the week or, well, that's getting into the 4th of July. We could then, ideally, we could do everything next Tuesday, but my guess is there's probably more than one person who's not going to be here. And maybe do an hour or so on the departments, get everybody just to provide a very brief overview, and then we could do the amendments as referenced by Councilmember Harmon, and then wrap up in advance of the July meetings. But
We had a couple people that were not going to be available for a proposed JADO meeting on the 1st. And so and you're both out of town for the week, right? So for the two that particularly are both of you available on Tuesday the 30th? Okay.
Yep.
Are either of you wanting to be at a review meeting? Okay, so we could do that review meeting on the 30th.
Madam Chair, I'll be out of town.
Right. But were you wanting to be there for a review meeting?
Oh, no.
Okay, so it'd be no problem. Okay. So if we did the review meeting on the 30th, then the question would be, people will be back after the 4th of July, would it be reasonable to take Councilwoman De Lisla's suggestion, and everybody chip in here, to just tack on the next committee of the whole meeting onto the council meeting on the 7th, or is that too much? I don't recall what the preliminary agenda looks like.
I could probably clean up the agenda.
We could handle that, huh?
We could make it a pretty brief agenda.
Okay.
My only concern, and this is for Councilmember Shum, who I think really is desirous of getting exposure to the departmental conversation. I mean, we could meet with you individually, or we could sit with you after it and watch it on video and clarify any questions that you have. I'm volunteering Doug for that.
If we scheduled it before the end of this week, would that pick up everybody? If that's possible? So if we looked and we were able to schedule it before the end of this week, yes?
Just procedurally, we do have planned the meeting on the 14th for that adoption.
Correct.
Now, if we push our discussion to the 7th, that probably pushes us a little bit, in fact, a lot bit, to get stuff posted and formally put on paper for the council. So we may have to push that to the 21st, which I know that at least one council member has a conflict with that evening in that vote. So just some procedural issues that we may not be considering as well.
But technically, the vote for the 14th or the 21st is just to set the cap, correct?
Correct.
Which we probably 6 months ago decided everybody knew we weren't going to raise the cap, right? So in a way, it's important, of course, but it's not as critical perhaps as getting this budget to where people are comfortable with it.
So I'm not looking at.
I'm sorry, and she had a question too.
Well, my question was, what does council finalized budget mean? What does that mean you actually do at that 7/14 meeting?
We're really just setting the cap, correct?
We said
So we would
expenditure
have
totals
Expenditure
for the entire budget.
cap for the entire budget.
So would we have time then to do what Councilman De La Isla said, to add the amendments then?
Probably. I know that city managers want, we backed it up a month. We used to do that after we did the cap. We used to do all this after the cap, but trying to get this whole thing backed up for many good reasons. All right, so if possible, we'll have that section by section meeting before the end of this week so that everybody who wanted to come can come. If not, it will be on the 30th. And we just need to figure out when to, and if we won't be able to get the whole council together the week of the 30th and the 1st. So we would have to have this meeting, the meeting for the motions the following week, either on Tuesday the 7th or on a different day. Shall we work from there to get that set? Is there a preference for people to tag it with the council meeting? Possible? Councilman Schrum?
Yeah, I'm inclined to
Jensen?
agree with Michelle. If we can pull that into an existing meeting, then I think that's a good idea.
Helps with everybody's schedules.
This is the height of summer and everything is extremely tight, so.
Yeah, and we've spent a lot of weekends already,
Yeah.
a lot of us, and evenings. So, and thanks to everybody for that. All right. Anything further in terms of scheduling? Otherwise, we'll get back. Thank you so much for the suggestion. City Manager?
I didn't want Sylvia to get mad at me for not talking about my, because she's watching us right now. So, we should plan on doing that on the 7th. We will have an extremely light meeting.
Wow. All right.
Brenda told me it was okay.
Oh, well, you've got to go check. All right, well, we will plan to get that, the work session, again, by the end of the week or on Tuesday if we can't do it. And then we will, we'll plan to have our session where we vote up or down any amendments on July 7th. With that, Councilman Chum.
Just to clarify off of Councilman Harmon's suggestion, we are not taking any action. We're not putting the budget through at this point, pending any amendments. Everything is tabled until the 7th. Is that a correct understanding?
Well, yes. Yes. I mean, we are not taking any action, and I want to reemphasize, I was not trying to push the budget through, but procedurally. Before we can start, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, before we can start entertaining motions to amend the budget, we have to first of all have a motion to make a recommendation to the full council to adopt the budget. That's what I was trying to do, was get us into a procedural position whereby it would be appropriate to entertain amendments to the budget. I was not trying to push the budget through tonight, Jonathan.
No, and that's what I was trying to follow up on.
Right.
So at this point, that procedural motion will happen on the 7th, and from there, we'll start the amendments.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so your amendment that you're holding on to will come up next.
And if I could follow, and there may be other amendments too, depending on, subsequent meetings with department heads, there may be other amendments too. And I certainly don't want, I know Deputy Mayor Hiller doesn't either, we don't want anyone to feel that this is a speak now or forever hold your peace when it comes to amendments. So certainly by the 7th, any amendment should be prepared to be brought. And at that point, we'll procedurally be in a position to entertain those. Does that make sense?
And now that we do have the staff's proposal on the street, I'll get with Mary or staff, and we'll have the order of bringing those amendments forward absolutely nailed, and so that we can start and just move right through them.
So I just have one clarification. Sorry, Mary and I were talking, and it was probably rude, but are we talking about this vote then would be the recommendation coming out of the budget committee, then it going to council, and then we deal with the amendments in the regular, at the regular council as a whole?
No, I don't think so. I think what we were going to do was convene the budget committee of the whole on the 7th at the end of the council meeting and do the process of the recommendation and the amendments.
I just want clarification. I wasn't sure what I heard.
That's what that we were simply, rather than having a special time for this committee to finish its recommendation work, we were going to do it on the 7th. I've got that wrong?
I'm confused.
Oh, I am too now. I thought I knew.
Was your recommendation? No, what I heard
Okay.
was that this body voted on this budget to pass it out of this committee to go to council, and then council would then pick it up on the amendments, then ultimately vote on it upon the end of that. That's what I heard. I was just clarifying. I'm not suggesting one way or the other.
Oh, we haven't voted on anything yet.
And that was the point of my question. Are we voting tonight, or are we not voting tonight? And my understanding was at this point, we're not voting tonight on anything.
That was my understanding.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I did mishear.
Okay. So that we've had all the input, we've had the discussion. There are people that will attend a session for further background information, and then we would convene and do our work as the committee of the whole on the 7th to make a proposal and any amendments, and come out with the budget committee's recommendation to the governing body for the budget, ideally in that single session on July 7th. Correct? We good?
Well,
Okay, we do.
and I'm sorry if I didn't express myself in a full sentence as I was thinking it, but my idea was maybe the budget committee would meet first, get everything going, and if the meeting was short enough, because I mean, we're thinking maybe an hour, then we could convene as the body of the council afterwards, if the agenda's short enough, and then we could keep on the discussion if there was something to be brought to the body of the council afterwards.
So your thought was that we would meet first instead of second?
But I don't know if that's possible.
With our routines and so on, I'm not sure. Actually, into the social services allocations are supposed to come through and that agenda item, so they'd be done and out of the way before we had our budget committee meeting if we did it first and clean that up a little bit. We've got a question and a, yes.
So I'm not quite sure the difference between the council meeting as a committee and the council meeting as a whole. We're all the same people, so in terms of the work we're doing here versus the work we'll be doing there, is procedurally there's a reason for this, or can we not just meet and talk about it and get it done?
Well, I think it's going to be the same, that the net result will be the same. There are some procedures, and the reasons for that go way back, and we probably can't change them right now anyway.
Just because we've always done it that way doesn't
Correct.
mean that's the right way to do it.
Understood. Councilman?
Well, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but, I mean, under the charter ordinance, doesn't it say that our city council meeting start at 6 p.m.?
Yes.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So our council meeting will start at 6 p.m.
I think so.
So,
And I just want to clarify for Councilmember Jensen, the meetings that occur, the votes that occur in the Budget Committee as a whole are non-binding votes. The votes that occur during the council meeting are binding votes. That's the primary difference.
Thank you.
And it gives us the room to really work it and come up with that proposal and finalize it later. All right, we clear now?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry to beat a dead horse again, poor horse. We are going to take action, non-binding action, after the council meeting on the 7th?
We will convene as the Budget Committee of the Committee of the
During the council meeting?
After.
After.
After the council meeting,
So it will be
correct?
meeting after the council meeting ends. Thank you.
Yes, immediately afterward. So technicalities of switching gears.
Oh, my.
We'll get it all straight. Mary will help us make sure we're on the line.
Legal.
Yeah. Anything further before the body? Thank you so much.
I would just
Oh.
like to invite everyone back here tomorrow night for a JADO meeting. 6 o'clock.
Oh, nice.
Actually, I have a commercial too, before we go. We had a lot of interest at the Crime Summit on last Saturday in the SEPTED training. And we've gotten a couple of communications from Angela and from the police department directly as well, with an invitation to each council person to nominate someone for a scholarship for that week of training, July 27th to 31st. It is really excellent training. If you haven't if there are members that haven't pursued that, the police department can get a more specific. There's like a 2-page agenda for all that gets covered. If that would be helpful to understand a little more who of your constituents might be interested. But it's really great training. Everybody that's gone to it likes it. The deadline is already passed, but I think they're still open if people want to come forward with a one person per district recommendation. So, Councilwoman.
I'll just make a quick congratulations and just, I was very impressed this week. On Friday, I was able to go to the installment of Marshall Miller, and there was nothing more impressive than to get there and to see a whole body of blue. Our mayor was present, our team of the police was there, and it was awesome to drive back home and watch all the sirens from Topeka, just showing the respect and the support from somebody that was right here. So I wanted to congratulate you publicly, Chief Brown, for that just good show of ethics, and for your department just to be there to celebrate that victory, that appointment for Marshall Miller. Thank you very much. Great moment of pride.
Cool.
Excellent. Anything else for the good of the order? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Sure.
Going downhill.